Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your sommelier of sci-fi, your master of fun and wonder, and many other things, the Archduke of Banterbury, one of the new ones someone hung on me, and boy, do I love that one. Although it's a little out there. The Archduke of Banterbury. I don't know. I still love it. Greetings to you. I'm, of course, bringing you Robservations episode number 363. Robservations is the show about something. And I, of course, am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you, Robcasting at you from the Robservatory, a place that is just filled with all of my thoughts, given flesh or given paper or plastic or however you want to call it. It's just great to be coming at you from the Robservatory, which is a place where I not only broadcast from, but I also create things. Ongoing are the special features for The Hills Run Red Blu-ray that comes out on June 16th. I'm working with director Dave Parker to create a great package for you guys. I'm working on 12 different pieces, a little over 2 hours, 2.5 hours maybe of material with Dave's stuff. We might end up having, 4.5 hours of material in this disc. And for our little movie, wow, it's pretty cool. There's some breaking news. If there was ever any doubt that you imagination connoisseurs, you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community, had that I am the entertainment industry oracle of Delphi, well, once again, I have been proven quite prophetic, and it only took less than an hour. That's right, for anyone who watched the John Campea show this morning, we were talking about what will the movie industry do moving forward, and the idea of pay-per-view or day-and-date releases or getting rid of the theatrical window between when something is released in the theater and when something is available for home or streaming or pay-per-view or video on demand or whatever you want to call it. As John very rightly pointed out this morning, there are the National Association of Theater Owners. Theater owners have a relationship with Hollywood, and they have an interest in preserving that business. And I had floated the idea that, but things are going to have to change, and the way they can make up the incredible, we're losing the entertainment business. Somebody might lose $20 billion. Well, gosh, ladies and gentlemen, not an hour after I had left John's show this morning, a bombshell announcement. Something, by the way, I did not know about when I was talking about this on the show, but it is truly something. It is a game changer, and I don't normally, I try and keep these shows evergreen, so I'm not, I don't usually go after topical. I want to keep them so people can come back and look at them, but this is too important not to talk about. And let me give a disclaimer right now. I understand that there is a lot more important things in the world going on, namely the global reach of the COVID-19 virus outbreak that has happened all over the world. I get that. But this is Robservations, the show about something, and it's about basically anything to do with anything imagination connoisseurs are caught up in. Now, I'm here to entertain you and talk about movies, entertainment, science fiction, fantasy, and horror in all of its myriad forms. So I don't want to diminish anything else that's going on in the rest of the world, but I just want to talk about what my show covers, and I think that's what you guys want to hear about. I just want to make sure that people don't think I'm making light of what's going on in the rest of the world, because I'm not. But it's not what my show is. But that said, before I jump into this, I just wanted to point out that a story broke on CNN this morning. Actually, it was updated at 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time. As police across the U.S. break for continued emergency calls in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, one Oregon police department is dealing with 9/11 calls for an entirely different type of emergency. Residents are calling because they've run out of toilet paper. The Newport Police Department put out a notice on Facebook urging residents to stop making emergency calls due to a toilet paper shortage. It's hard to believe that we even have to post this, the police wrote. Do not call 911 just because you ran out of toilet paper. You will survive without our assistance. I just wanted to throw that out there. Really, people, that's what corn on the cob is for. Remember how we used to get by before the modern age. Read a little history, you'll survive. I think it's great because, I've got my 75 long boxes of comics here, and there are, I have to say, I've been going through my collection because I'm going to get rid of it very soon, one way or another, and I've been pulling out key books to keep, but the rest of it can go. And let me just say that, you know what? Comic book newsprint, not so bad on the ass. Just saying, got a lot of it. But anyway, what has happened in the last hour has been a sea change in the entertainment business, in movie distribution, theatrical distribution, that could have long-ranging and far-reaching ramifications to the motion picture distribution business moving forward. This dropped on Deadline at 11:30. So literally an hour and a half ago, this article dropped on Deadline. Universal making Invisible Man, The Hunt, and Emma available in-home on Friday as exhibition braces for shutdown. Trolls sequel to hit cinemas and VOD Easter weekend. Wow, I mean, I can't tell you how crazy this actually is. In an unprecedented crunch of the theatrical window as several markets across the U.S. closed down in response to safety from the coronavirus as well as worldwide, NBC Universal's Universal Pictures is officially making their current movies in cinematic release. Blumhouse's The Invisible Man and the Hunt and Focus Features Emma, available in homes as early as this Friday for on-demand 48-hour rental at the suggested price of $19.99. This is both for domestic and offshore markets where the titles are in release. Jeff Shell, CEO of Universal, NBC Universal, made the announcement this morning. In addition, with the outlook of theatrical marketplace unclear, Universal DreamWorks Animation, The Trolls World Tour, which was scheduled to be the first theatrical comeback title down the road in the midst of the coronavirus climate on Easter weekend, April 10th, will now go day and date in homes and on the big screen. Trolls World Tour doesn't roll out widely offshore until April 20th, and in those markets, the sequel will also be available for VOD rental as well as cinemas. Already, Trolls World Tour has a large marketing campaign already underway, including the conglomerates Comcast, NBC Universal, and Sky's cross-company symphony support. Trolls World Tour opened over the weekend in Singapore and Malaysia to a lackluster $200,000. That doesn't mean anything because of what's going on theatrically around the world. Note, this theatrical window breaking doesn't extend to Universal's exorbitant $175 million Robert Downey feature Dolittle, which tanked theatrically this winter with $227.3 million worldwide. That movie will follow through with a regular theatrical to home window. Dolittle is awaiting release in China once that country's exhibition infrastructure gets back on track following its coronavirus outbreak. The intentions here by NBC Universal is to make big movies available in the home to the masses as current circumstances have made it more challenging for them to head out and as the nation is poised for a massive shut-in at home. NBC Universal will continue to evaluate the entertainment environment as conditions evolve and will determine the best distribution strategy in each market when the current unique situation changes, read a statement this morning. The current theatrical window is 90 days. Those titles that don't obey that window aren't booked by the nationwide circuits like AMC, Cinemark, and Regal. Netflix has tried to crunch the window in regards to their releases with major chains, but they've never found a common meeting ground. Hence, the $200 million productions like Martin Scorsese's lauded The Irishman played in limited theatrical release before finding their way on the streaming service a month later. At this point in time, the theatrical VOD day-and-date release policy seen here isn't one set in stone for future titles beyond Trolls World Tour. Decisions on titles and duration have not been made yet. Universal Pictures has a broad and diverse range of movies, with 2020 being no exception. Rather than delaying these films or releasing them into a challenged distribution landscape, we wanted to provide an option for people to view these titles in the home that is both accessible and affordable, said Shell. We hope and believe that people will still go to the movies in theaters where available, but we understand that for people in different areas of the world, that is increasingly becoming less possible. This past weekend, the domestic weekend box office saw a 22-year low of $55.3 million, with around 109 cinemas closed throughout the country. Both LA and New York, which are the box office capitals of the U.S., have mandated that their cinemas close soon. Mayor Eric Garcetti closed movie theaters yesterday in LA. I believe de Blasio also, or is it Bill Blasio? Bill de Blasio also closed movie theaters in New York. LA was the top grossing market with $2.6 million this past weekend, down 55% from last weekend, while New York, typically number 2, dropped to third with $1.469 million. The projected grosses for the crop of new wide releases, The Hunt, I Still Believe, and Bloodshot, were off significantly, with their respective 3 days coming in at $5.3 million, $9.5 million, and $9.3 million. In normal market conditions, The Hunt could have posted $8 million to $10 million, Bloodshot about the same, and I Still Believe between $11 million to $14 million. Excuse me, Disney's Onward posted the biggest second weekend drop for a Pixar title ever at 72%, or $10.5 million, as moviegoers were distanced in stockpiling goods given the coronavirus mania. I mean, this is, let's see. However, I'm not going to read the whole thing. The move to put Trolls World Tour out day and date is a shocker. After No Time to Die left April 10th Easter corridor for Thanksgiving, Universal swooped in. The pick for some time was looked as a sign of hope by exhibition that if this coronavirus situation eases up, Trolls World Tour would eventually bring us back. The first movie, which cost $125 million, went on to make $347 million worldwide and spawned a spin-off TV show, merchandising, and a hit song by the Pick star Justin Timberlake, Can't Stop the Feeling, which went quadruple platinum with over 7 million units sold in the U.S. The last time in recent memory when major studio releases were made available both in theaters and in-home was Sony's The Interview during that studio's massive hack 6 years ago. Given the controversy that James Franco, Seth Rogen comedy stirred up with North Korea in its satire, with that country being one of the reported suspects behind the hack, Sony pulled the full-on theatrical release and made The Interview available for purchase and rental on demand in-home. While the major circuits wouldn't play The Interview, smaller chains like the Alamo Drafthouse and mom-and-pop cinemas actually did. The Interview, which cost an estimated $44 million before prints and advertising, only made $11 million at the domestic box office over the 2014 year-end holiday. Wow, I got to tell you, people, history has a funny way of causing both very slow and rapid changes to how human life goes on. And in terms of the motion picture distribution business, there's been a massive sea change happening over the last 10 years that is inevitable in my mind. I personally first started seeing it back when I was working on the Star Trek the motion picture, Star Trek The Next Generation Blu-rays. As everyone knows, I talk about it all the time. I worked for 3 years creating documentaries with Roger Lay Jr. for both Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Enterprise. And we were creating, at the time, CBS was taking that show and bringing it into the high-def world, into the 2K world, to release on Blu-ray and to release in syndication. And it is, to my mind, it was the most extensive and most unbelievable restoration of a television show to date. Even now, it hasn't been surpassed. I don't know if it ever will be surpassed in terms of the work that was put into it. But what was interesting was, I think, ultimately, the Blu-ray sales, at least for Next Gen, were extremely disappointing. I don't think it's wrong for me to say that now. This is my own opinion. But unfortunately, Star Trek fans and a lot of the general population really just they didn't see that there was a whole lot of reason to buy Star Trek The Next Generation yet again. Because back in the day, you're talking about 2011, 2012, not a lot of people had gone over to Blu-ray yet, not as many as you might think. And there's a lot of people that really, in my mind, didn't understand how great the restoration actually was. You really have to be a fan of that kind of technology, high definition, and know what you're watching, because not only was the picture extraordinary, the sound was remixed from 2-channel stereo into 7.1, And it was amazing. The whole thing was amazing. But the price point that CBS was selling this at, because they had to pay for the restoration was somewhere between, well, let's call it $12 to $14 million. It was extraordinary what they spent. So the price point was very expensive. And consumers, of course, were used to paying less money. But what was also happening at the time that really affected sales was streaming was like going like this. Streaming was taking off like a rocket. And Star Trek was sort of a mainstay of many different streaming platforms. So people are like, well, why do I need to spend a premium price or pay a premium price for something I can get streaming? And unfortunately, the sales figures were disappointing, which is why there wasn't any hurry to pull the trigger on either Deep Space Nine or Voyager, which would have cost more money. And of course, in the long run, those shows never had the ratings of TNG. So if TNG was disappointing in terms of disc sales, Deep Space Nine and Voyager certainly weren't going to do any better, and they would cost more to do. It took 4 years to restore Next Generation onto HD, and it's going to take the same amount of time to do both Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So you're looking at an 8-year commitment and probably an expenditure close to $40 million. So why do it? I mean, I would do it anyway. I think it would be worth spending the money to preserve the legacy of the Star Trek franchise. But I understand. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that streaming was extremely disruptive in terms of everything. They've been talking about a writer's strike. And the one thing that when the writers strike, what they have going for them is they shut down production. Well, production has been shut down. And what the writers always wanted to do is they want to get a fair share of streaming revenue. It's a big deal. If you're writing movies, there are box office bumps. There's all kinds of incentives based on all of these things are in flux now. The entire entertainment business, the movie business and the TV business are completely in flux. Now, people want to watch content. That isn't going to change. But how money, like I talked about on the show, I've talked a lot about how movies are financed. And they know when they're making tentpole movies, the reason they're able to make movies that now are $150 to $200 million is because there is a financial structure in place. They know if they're making Jurassic World, or they're making another Fast and the Furious movie, or they're making another James Bond movie, they already have a pretty good indicator of where those movies are going to hit in terms of their box office gross, assuming they're good. But, when you're up to the 9th movie of a franchise, which is actually the 10th movie of a franchise if you include Hobbs and Shaw, they have a pretty good chart. I mean, those people want to see actuarial tables, or they want to see black and white tables of how much money, spreadsheets, that kind of thing. Well, they have them on these tentpole movies. But it's contingent upon, of course, theatrical distribution. And if theatrical distribution is going to be totally disrupted, and as I said this before, there aren't The Interview being one of the only movies they look at, it made $11 million on a $44 million spend. I mean, that was that was not great. So it'll be interesting to see if the movie-going audience, will people, look, just because in 2 or 3 weeks, are you going to get people flocking back to the theaters the way they flocked back to the theaters before? Or are people just going to be like, we can do whatever? I don't think that's true. I think people have learned a lesson. They're going to live their lives differently as they do. I mean, it'll eventually probably go back to normal when people are sure that the problem is gone. But make no mistake, the movie business will never, ever be the same again. And if Universal is doing this, and if this new Trolls film, if they do well with it, we're going to see the erosion of there is a truce between theater owners. And look, everyone loves movies. I talked about how much I'm passionate about on the John Campea Show moviegoing, how I think, never forget how important it is to be able to sit in a theater with people from all walks of life, every shape, size, color, creed, people that have different religious beliefs than you, people that might be different genders than you are, multiple genders, people that have different sexualities, different colors, whatever. everybody puts those differences aside when they go into a movie theater. Everybody sits down next to people they don't know, perfect strangers, and everybody's excited to be there. Sure, there's various stages of excitement. I'm sure various levels of excitement. But when you go into a movie theater and sit down for a new release, it's one of, in my mind, and maybe that's why I've loved the movies since I was such a little kid, is because it's inherently positive. You know, you're going into this room full of perfect strangers that are all excited to be there. They're all there for one reason. They're there to see this movie. They've come to see this movie. They think this movie, and they're going to have an experience that they know is going to be positive for them. At least they hope so. And in this, it's fantastic. And I want to see that experience preserved. As we talked about on John's show today, I think that it's really important when you go watch a movie like Infinity War or Endgame, you know, or you watch a great comedy, you know, or you watch an epic, like, say, a Christopher Nolan's new movie coming out called Tenet. That communal experience is what makes movie going in theaters so great. No matter how great your home theater system is, no matter what kind of money, and I've been in some home theaters that are spectacular. I've been in $1 million home theaters where the equipment alone, forget the room that you're in, but the equipment alone was $1 million worth of equipment. And it's amazing. If you've got $1 million to make a home theater, that's terrific. And you can sit down and watch movies. But no matter how good your home theater is, it will never replace the joy of sitting with perfect strangers and paying attention to a story and just being captivated and entertained and swept away by a great story. That communal experience is something I don't want to see disappear. But I think that, make no mistake, if the studios can figure out a way where they can make more money, maximize their dollar, and cut out the middleman, they will. This is an inevitability, I think. Now, does that mean movie going is going to completely go away? No, I don't think so. Because for the very reason, I don't think anybody is just going to stay home and watch Infinity War or a movie, any Marvel movie or the new James Bond movie. I think most people they're going to want to go see those in the theater. And as distribution, AMC has their Dolby theaters. I love the Dolby cinemas, but I love my IMAX laser projection. I love going to the Chinese. I love going to the Bridge. The Bridge isn't here anymore. I love going to Universal. I mean, I love that stuff, and I'll never have a home theater that's, even though IMAX wants to put theaters in the home, but having that giant screen, there's nothing better, having that thunderous sound system. I mean, if one thing that it'll come out that I'm always complaining about, dim bulbs in theaters, that studio distribution, the movie theaters are going to have to up their game and make sure that when you go into a movie theater, the presentation is tip top. But it's going to change, and that's going to affect every part of the industry from the top down. And I think this is shocking news that Universal is doing this. I mean, talk about movie theaters are being closed all over the world, and I understand. I just feel from Universal's perspective, look, they're making movies. They've borrowed tens of millions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, or hundreds of millions of dollars to make these films, and they can't rest on their laurels while they're losing money. But unfortunately, the studios have all the other alternatives with which to generate income because they own their content. But poor movie theaters, when they're shut down, they're shut down. And they're going to have to pay their rent, and their employees have no jobs. And it's not good. I mean, the studios are not going to reach out and help those movie theaters. They're just not going to do it. And if the studios figure out that, well, you know, maybe we shouldn't, do we really need theatrical distribution? This is going to, unfortunately, well, in real time, they're certainly going to have an indicator of what they're going to be able to do and get away with in the future. And I don't want to lose my theater going experience. I don't. And while I knew this was somehow inevitable, this was going to be inevitable. We'll see how well it works. We'll see what they come up with. I don't see major tentpoles. Like they said, they're not pulling Doolittle out of theaters yet. because it underperformed, so they put it in China. If they can make $50 or $100 million, that's good for them. It's good for the bottom line, and I get it. It ain't show friends, though. It's show business. The show must go on. And I completely understand what's happening here. I understand exactly why it's being done. And unfortunately, I don't see that the movie theater chains have a way to combat this. They've tried to do some interesting things. Like they've put football games on Sundays. You can go to the theater and watch football games on their projectors. That's pretty cool. They sell packages so you can get food and all those things. Those things are great. But again, it worries me. I know I probably shouldn't be necessarily worried about this kind of thing, but in my life, being a filmmaker myself, being somebody who's been in love with the movie since I was a little kid, I want to see movie theaters protected. I do. And on the other hand, I want the business to succeed as well. I really do. And right now we're in a very unique situation, and Universal is certainly taking advantage of it as anybody who does good business would. I mean, it's movie theaters aren't a charity. They want to make money. But as John Campea pointed out, having worked for AMC, he knows how small the margins are with movie theaters. And I mean, I get it. I understand it. But, I love the ArcLight chain here in Los Angeles. I love the Landmark Theater chain. I love Regal. I love AMC. I'm a big fan of these things, but these are businesses that also have to go on, and they're large. They have real estate holdings, or there's all kinds of things. This is very disruptive, and I just hope in the long run. That movie theaters aren't irrevocably damaged by this. I really hope that's the case. But we'll see. I mean, this is incredibly, incredibly disruptive, and I was pretty shocked to see that this was announced. But maybe not as shocked as I wasn't that shocked because I was talking about it just today on the John Campea show. So, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've been thinking about if I could have paid $50, or even if it was $100, if you think about it, I mean, if they made a movie like, say, No Time to Die, you could make a big thing of it, $100 for a brand new movie, for 6 people to see a brand new film. If you have a family of 6 or you have a family of 4 and 2 more people can come over, you have to pay $100. I mean, I don't know how something would not be pirated or something like that, but I could see it happening. Because I would pay $100 to see No Time to Die on my home theater. I would do that, and I'd much rather see it in IMAX at a theater. But if I couldn't, well then, I don't know, man. I don't know. It scares me. My beloved movie theaters. I do not want them to go away. But what do you guys have to say? Let's see. I got a few super chats that came in. Let's go to that. Otaku Senpai mentioned that I might have missed their super chat. And Otaku Senpai said, Picard is playing Patrick Stewart very well. I thought that was a really interesting... I think I did read that super chat, but maybe it's another one, but that's the one I found. So I apologize if I didn't read that on the air, but I like that, the idea that that Captain Picard is actually playing Patrick Stewart on the Picard show rather than the reverse. I thought that was pretty cheeky. But now to jump back where I was, Willow sent in a chat saying, my parents are bewildered by why people in the West are hoarding toilet paper. In China, the first thing people tend to hoard during a crisis is rice. Humans have survived thousands of years without toilet paper. You can't survive without food. Shrug. Yeah, I don't either. Honestly, I mean, as I said before, I like a clean bum. Like to be ready. You never know when you're going to be called upon to do some action. You want to be clean. And I get it. I understand it. But I really don't understand. It's not like coronavirus is food poisoning. It's not like you're spewing from both ends. I really don't understand why people are hoarding toilet paper or paper towels. I find that just kind of strange. There was one guy, I guess, was it John telling me that some guy was spent $30,000 on toilet paper thinking he would profiteer off of it. Then, of course, they shut that down. I don't get it, man. I really don't understand. And as I read at the top of the hour here, the Oregon police have said, please, please don't call 911 if you have no toilet paper. It's not an emergency. You know, it just shows that some of the population in a real crisis, if we all lived in the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome world, a lot of these people would have been used for fodder for the Thunderdome, and rightfully so. Not to make light of people's problems, but still, man. I mean, come on. I'm going to put on my glasses. Let's see. Wait. Chairman Mao says, seriously, Rob, just like the new saying now is, stay the F home, the next saying is, stock the F up. Come on, folks. You shouldn't be allowed into adulthood if you're too lazy to stock up on at least 2 months of toilet paper. It doesn't cost that much. Hey, I usually go in. We have a family of 4 here. We have 4 people living in our house. So I usually go for either the 24 or the 48 rolls at one time. I mean, that's just par for the course for me because that's what we have going on. Because, you know, why shouldn't we? Kyle McCaskill sent in a super chat and says, Disney should launch a new release streaming service and charge $300 a month. That's $9 billion a year in revenue. Well, I think, Kyle, that's an interesting idea, but if you look at how many movies Disney releases a year, they might only release 8 to 10 movies a year. And is anyone going to pay that? I don't know. That's really interesting. I don't have the answer to that. I got a few letters. Let's see what I've got here. I've got a letter again from Stephen Goggin. Stephen Goggin writes in and says, Dear Rob and listeners, I hope everyone is doing as well as they can during this strange time and that we will all eventually get through it. But on to my letter and a second letter about 2 of my favorite subjects that seem to go hand in hand, and that would be watches and movies. I have noticed how the watch seems to play an interesting part of the plots in the following movies. Pulp Fiction, most of the main events in the film unfold around Bruce Willis's watch. When Bruce is given the watch by Christopher Walken, who gives an excellent speech about the watch, and when Bruce forgets his watch and goes back for it. Die Hard, in the final scene where Alan Rickman is hanging off the edge of a window, and again Bruce Willis unclasps his wife's watch, and poor Alan Rickman falls to his death. The Blues Brothers, when Jake gets released, he's given his belongings back, and the first item Jake is given back, we see Frank Oz give him, is his broken Timex digital watch. And throughout the film of the Blues Brothers, Jake checks to see what time it is on his broken watch. They Live, John Nada is given a watch to get into the portal. I'm trying to find out what type of watch, but this, so far, I have not been able to do. I have also noticed that both Marty McFly in Back to the Future and Breaking Bad's Walter White wear the same Casio calculator watch. My favorite James Bond, as far as what type of watches James Bond wears, has to go to Roger Moore. He wore a digital Hamilton watch, the mini Seiko TV watch, which did actually exist and was not just a gadget. Moore wore them alongside wearing the customary James Bond Rolex and Omega, which was cool as that meant most folk could get them. I like the new Swatch Bond collection. I did too, until the Honor Majesty Secret Service Swatch sold out. So if anybody wants to send me a present and can get me that Swatch Honor Majesty Secret Service watch, I would be most appreciated. Most appreciative. Those are my observations for the moment. As always, to yourself and your listeners, live long and prosperous. Stephen G., the Irishman in Somerset. Well, Stephen G., you know what's interesting? I like watches. I've always thought watches are cool. I really do. I think they are amazing, and I don't wear one now because I just don't. And it's kind of a bummer, and I feel bad. And, there's a YouTube channel I watch, this guy, Producer Michael. He's a rich music producer who shows you fast cars, and he loves watches, and he goes to Jacobs. I think it's Jacobs and Company in New York, where they literally have watches that cost millions of dollars that are amazing. And I look at them, and I'm like, man, I want one of those watches. But yeah, I'm a big fan of watches, and for a while, most of my life, I would feel naked if I didn't have them. So I'm with you. Yeah. So I am right there with you. This next letter comes from Dylan McCandless. Hey, Rob. One of these days, I'll write into the show about something other than Star Trek. But what can I say? That's where my head is at these days. One of my favorite early Voyager episodes was the Season 1 episode, Phage. In this episode, we were introduced to the Vidians, a race of humanoids who steal body parts from other races because they've fallen prey to a deadly contagion. In the episode, they use a highly advanced form of transporter technology to beam Neelix's lungs directly out of his body. I know. While this probably should have killed him outright, and some fans may have preferred that it did, the EMH is able to keep him artificially alive via the power of artistic license. The Voyager crew must then embark on a mission to track down the Vidians and retrieve their comrade's stolen organ. Now, is it just me, or does that plot sound familiar? Although the reasons for the organ theft are different in each case, this stolen lung scenario is not altogether dissimilar from one of Trek's most notoriously bad episodes, Spock's Brain. I came to this realization recently, and aside from being an amusing observation, I think it is a good example of how the same premise can be executed so well or so poorly based solely on the quality of the writing. I also wanted to ask, have you read the autobiography of James T. Kirk and or the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard? What were your thoughts? I enjoyed both books, although I must say that while I'm much more of a Picard guy, I enjoyed the Kirk book more overall. Well, the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard and the autobiography of James Kirk were written by David Goodman, who is a terrific television writer. He worked with Seth MacFarlane a lot, and he is a writer and a producer on The Orville. I believe he is also president of the Writers Guild of America, if memory serves, which is pretty cool, and I really enjoyed those books. He is a longtime Star Trek fan. He was a writer on Star Trek Enterprise. I was able to work with him a little bit with the documentaries. Terrific guy. Really, really, really like him a lot, and those books are excellent. Both of them are excellent. I mean, I, of course, like the Kirk book better, only because I'm more of a Kirk dude. But yeah, I think that big fan, really like those books a lot. And he's doing, I don't know if it's come out yet, but he was doing the autobiography of Spock. So I think that's pretty neat. So yes, Dylan, by the way, don't ever stop writing in about Star Trek. But yeah, look, that episode, while organ stealing, I think it comes more from the idea, you know, people wake up in hotel rooms and they find out they've been drugged by the girl they met at the bar the other night, and they're missing a kidney. You know, that whole story. I think that's where they got it from, not so much as a ripoff of Spock's Brain. But what I liked about that episode is I've always believed that transporter technology should be used in exactly that way. I've often joked that in the Star Trek universe, when people talk about how there's no toilets, I've talked about this recently on this show, that wouldn't it be interesting if you'd use transporter technology to literally beam body waste out of you? You know, so instead of taking a monster dump, that you would actually have that matter beamed out of your body, because it's going to be reused anyway in replicator technology, whether those atoms or that energy is going to be used to recreate whatever. It makes sense that all of that matter that comes out of you, whether it's water, liquid matter, or solid, that it's going to be reused. And I would think, I mean, maybe transporter technology en masse, if it's in everyone's quarters, it would use too much energy or something. But I really like the idea that you would do surgical transplants with transporter technology and maybe nanotech or something. To me, that's what Star Trek is all about. And the idea of using transporter technology to do surgery or remove organs is exactly the kind of thing that is, I think, great. And I love that. That kind of thing goes on, and I think it was cool. It's a great science fiction concept. I think that it's really neat. It's really neat, and I like that idea. Star Wars Rock sent in a tip and said, "Hi Rob, as you have more time on your hands now because of COVID-19 epidemic, why don't you use this time to catch up on the Arrowverse shows post-crisis?" Well, Star Wars Rocks, that's not a bad idea. I probably could do that, but As you know, I don't have that much time because I'm producing the special features for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray that comes out June 19th, and that's a pretty quick turnaround. We deliver the features end of March, and we'll see the Blu-ray come out on the 19th of June, which is very, very cool. And I love that. But maybe I will. I mean, I've been binge watching shows. I'm in the middle of Hunters right now, which I'm really digging. So, but I think that's a good idea. It's not a bad idea. So yes, Star Wars rocks. Maybe I will do that. Kent Davis sends in a letter and says, "Wow, what a succinct description of Jack Kirby artwork. The Krell machinery, right on the money." Well, what Kent Davis is talking about is, I believe he wrote in, I read his letter yesterday about Jack the King Kirby, and one of the things, he's a very famous comic artist. He basically co-created most of the Marvel characters that you know and love. And those characters, one of the things that, besides characters, that Kirby was known for was the way he drew technology. And I loved the way Kirby depicted super science, super tech. One of the interesting things that Kirby did was he actually drew the comic for the adaptation of Marvel's 2001: A Space Odyssey. That got a little crazy, and I think Machine Man spun out of that. But I almost, when I had lots of money in the aughts, I almost dropped 10 grand for Kirby's artwork of the Discovery from 2001. I was this close. I was so close. I'm like, I had the money, and I was going to do it. Because I always wanted to own a piece of Kirby art and to have the Discovery from 2001, my love of Kubrick, my love of 2001. I just didn't do it. And it was a double-page spread, and oh, man, I should have bought it. I think back, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I mean, I don't know later in life what you're going to do with that. I could have left it to somebody, I suppose, but I really wanted to get that. I love the way Kirby draws technology, super science, and yes, I've always thought that the Krell Labs in Forbidden Planet was exactly the way that that I've always thought that's Kirby, man. That's Kirby in a nutshell. He is totally drawing the Krell, which I thought was good. So yeah. Bob Koal sends in another letter. Mr. B, it is so gracious of you to read people's letters. I especially appreciate how you respond to those letters in such a thorough and thoughtful manner. I've been shocked that you've read all of mine, as I'm sure is the case for other Post-Geek Singularity letter writers. Hearing my words read aloud in your William Conrad-esque tone is a hoot. It inspires me to work on writing chops that I've let atrophy for years. Your response to my speculation regarding the Capra effect and Norman Rockwell was so spot on. It really helped me look at the concept with much more clarity. It's as simple as attention to detail. An example comes to mind. Our introduction to Josh Brolin's Lewin Moss in No Country for Old Men. His picking up that spent rifle shell while hunting. Now we know he lives by a code. Details. Bob Koal, a.k.a. Attic Hatch. P.S. You really do have a William Conrad quality to your voice. Canon lives. I used to love Canon when I was a kid. Come next holiday season, a reading of Conrad's spicy version of the 12 Days of Christmas would be epic. It can be found on YouTube. I didn't know he had a... isn't it William Conrad who reads the opening of Buck Rogers in the 25th Century? Is it William Conrad? You know what? Let me check. Let me see. I want to say it is, but I don't remember. Let's see. William Conrad. William Conrad was the secret voice behind these pop culture, pop culture classics from your youth. The man who played Canon played an unseen part in the legacy of Star Wars, Buck Rogers, and The Fugitive. I'm going to read this. As this is on Me Too TV. It's by the Me Too staff. It's September 11th, 2017. As the star of Cannon, William Conrad made for one unlikely and awesome action hero. Heavy-set and middle-aged, Cannon was... That's kind of like me. Cannon was quick to apply rough justice on criminals. The detective would climb out of his ice blue Lincoln Continental and slap around a hooligan without second thought. He even had a trademark fighting move, the Cannon belly bump. While Conrad was a wonderful physical actor, his long career was perhaps reliant on his deep, authoritative voice. He began, naturally, in radio, most notably as a star in Gunsmoke. His Marshal Matt Dillon was deemed better heard than seen, however, and the role was recast with James Arness when the show made the leap to television. Ooh, I didn't know that. But Conrad would get a chance to quietly, well, not quietly, more surreptitiously, work on the Gunsmoke TV series years later. He narrated an episode of the 19th season. That was just one of his many notable and overlooked voiceover gigs. Here are some projects you will probably fondly recall from your childhood, and Conrad was the narrator in all of them. Rocky and Bullwinkle, The Fugitive, that unforgettable Keep America Beautiful public service announcement with Iron Eyes Cody crying. Gunsmoke, The Making of Star Wars. Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. Already linked to the Star Wars universe, Conrad was the obvious choice to narrate this small-screen space adventure that followed in its wake. If you needed to explain a concept or backstory in 30 seconds, Conrad was your man. We miss when TV shows would clearly explain themselves like this. For 500 years, Buck Rogers drifted through a world in which reality and fantasy merged into a timeless dream, Conrad proclaimed each week in the opening credits. That probably wasn't my best. He even did the voiceover for Manimal. I love that. Well, Bob Kowal, one of the things Bob was talking about yesterday was he wrote in and asked about the Capra effect and what I thought it was. And he used an example of how characters would come on and become immediately memorable. And I threw back at him. And he also brought up Norman Rockwell paintings. And I said, everything that makes, what really makes great writing, especially when it comes to movies, when you're writing a screenplay, and this is Screenwriting 101. Screenplays must be visually evocative in the reader. So when you're reading a script, you want your prose, and remember, there are screenwriting rules, like, for instance, when you're writing a descriptive paragraph, you keep it to, say, 4 sentences. That's all you got. You got 4 sentences, you got to set the scene. And it has to be evocative. So if you write, let's say your character's name is Bob, and if I use the example, if Bob walks into a room, well, that's not very visually evocative. That's just telling you what happened. What you want is rather than give, because a lot of novice screenwriters want to direct the movie, and they'll tell you the camera creeps as it shows Bob walk into a room. That's bad screenwriting, because that's the director will decide whether the camera creeps or not. What you do instead is you add, how does Bob walk into a room? You know, Bob trepidatiously walks into a room. Bob bounds into the room. You know, tell us something that paints a picture. And that's what great screenwriting is. And that's what you want to do. Well, Norman Rockwell does the same thing. Bob was talking about Norman Rockwell paintings, and I said, what makes Norman Rockwell paintings so interesting is the detail, the visual detail. I mean, you look at every single thing has something to say about that image, and that's why his work ultimately, his as a whole, his work was so evocative. When I think Americana, I mean, I think of things like Main Street USA, but I don't think necessarily of Disneyland. I think of Main Street USA as painted by Norman Rockwell. To me, that's the myth of America. I don't know if anyone captured it as well as Norman Rockwell does. So that's what we talked about yesterday. So, Bob, thanks again for writing in. I very much appreciate that. Thanks for writing in twice. I never thought about having a Robert Conrad voice. I'll have to work on that, I suppose. See if I can do one better. Doug Harris writes in and says, "Greetings, RMB, with the new season of Westworld premiering this week. I'm writing to you to get your thoughts on the show." I have not watched the season premiere of Westworld last night. I was working on my special features, and then Elizabeth and I watched the movie that we will be discussing on ElizaViews on our new show, Whining About Movies. We'll drink a bottle of wine, and we will be discussing Bruce Robinson's 1986 film With Nail and Eye this evening. One of my favorite comedies, a movie that I think I've shown it to many people in America, and I think they don't quite understand what is appealing about it. Elizabeth was no exception, but I showed her a documentary about it, and she's done some reading. We've discussed it, but it'll be interesting to talk about the movie tonight on Whining About the Movies. Anyway, so back to this letter. That's why I haven't seen the season premiere of Westworld Season 3. So Doug goes on. First, if you can indulge me, I would like to give you my thoughts. Unlike my favorite shows from the previous decade, Hannibal and The Americans, I was immediately excited just by the premise. But I find Westworld one of the most frustrating shows that I've ever watched. Not because I find it bad, but because it is so close to being great. The thing that holds the first season back from being great for me is that the writers wrote a season that was meant to be binged when it was going to be released weekly. Then they overcorrected for the second season by making it unnecessarily confusing. When I say the first season was meant to be binged, the two major plot twists I was able to figure out midway through the season. That wouldn't have been a problem, but the final episode's emotional punches were completely reliant on you not knowing the twist, so they came off as hollow. With the second season, I personally didn't find it confusing, and I was able to follow it pretty easily. I just felt with all the timelines and stories going on that they were trying to make it confusing to make it seem smarter than it was. Touché, Doug. You can read my letter on video, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Doug, I'm with you. I thought Westworld Season 1 was pretty interesting, compelling television. However, like you with Season 2, I wondered, why are they doing this? Why are they making this show so relentlessly confusing? And it seemed to me, like you just said, just to make it seem smarter than it was. The converging timelines were kind of interesting, but did they really matter in the long run? I question that. I don't know. And I did feel that it was kind of an audience letdown. Now, I have yet to watch Season 3. But I'm very curious as to where it's going. To me, though, I will say this. I find Westworld's depiction of, let's call them synthetic life, even though they're hosts, they're not real life forms, that they are, shall we say, a little bit more fully realized than the idea of synths in Star Trek Picard. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. I haven't watched it yet. We shall see where that goes. So I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to jump in. It looked really interesting. I like how they took a left turn, but maybe it's not a left turn at all. Who knows? Maybe what appears to be the real world is just another world, and that we're going to find out there's going to be some big whammy at the end of this season that hits us over the head. Nothing is like what we think it is, or some such thing. I just wonder, what do the alternate timelines have to do with the overall story they're telling? Do they have anything to do with the overall story they're telling? Are they making some meta commentary about humanity and hosts and how we treat artificial life? I don't know. All I know is it's a handsomely mounted show. I like all of the actors, and it's a lot of fun. I have another letter from Adam Blue. Hi, Rob. I think this recent social justice over the past few years has been great to see. Other humans are getting more exposure than they would have in the past, and I think that's only a good thing. I know some tend to recoil, and I think it's agendas being pushed, and while maybe there's been a slight overreaction, I think that helps us find the creatives, and eventually it helps the diversity be the norm. But will it help true creativity to be a norm? Have you ever wondered how many females or persons of color creatives would have pulled off Star Trek better than JJ? Actually, I have, quite often. I'm sure you have, Rob, as you say. Or even Star Wars? Look, I'm a white male hoping to be a filmmaker, but I constantly see these white male filmmakers that end up making us nerds question their output. If we dissect it, we see that it's really based on lack of knowledge of a property, but these filmmakers don't have a lack of knowledge in the business. So with the diversity being pushed now, in the next few years, it can just be the norm. And instead of Hollywood looking at a list of white directors, there will be so many examples of creative directors instead of the default, which seems to be find a white guy from a small pool of business-oriented filmmakers. Again, I'm a white man hoping to be a director one day, but if the underwhelming white filmmakers out there get pushed for creativity from diverse directors, then I see a future where creativity is definitely the X factor, and I could stand out. Does this seem inevitable to you? With Hollywood pooling from all creators, it's not just sticking to white men. Would the JJs or Kurtzmans of the future be easily passed over? Or do you think these sort of filmmakers are businessmen in the business of appealing to the widest audience despite story integrity, and this will stay as a long-term viable strategy to infect future properties? I have my thoughts on how capitalism is entwined with creativity, but that's a whole other letter. Thanks for reading. Adam Blue. Well, Adam, I think that's a great letter. Here's a theory. I don't know if it's a theory so much as an observation, or dare I say it, a Robservation. How do I say this? I don't want to get in trouble. That's a funny thing. I can't just... So, the way our society was constructed, look, the way our society has evolved, all of us had roles to play. Without getting into a discussion about gender and all of that, the fact is, we are predominantly two genders. I say predominantly, so we can let everybody else have their say too. But there's men and women, and for the majority of human history, for tens of thousands of years, women had to have children and men had to be the protectors while the women stayed at home and looked after the children. This was something that evolved, and it was something that had to occur. Otherwise, humanity never would have endured. And as soon as we stopped in one place and started to, farm, and we started to plant things, those thousands of years of biology slowly started to change, because suddenly, when you're not on the move and fighting off predators and civilization was developing, women could do other things. And as our society has progressed, let's say over the last 4,000 years of civilization, or maybe longer, incrementally we've made inroads into our societies. Our societies have changed. People's roles have changed. And for instance, early on, if you look at the early days of science fiction, sure, people are going to be like, well, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Look, I get that. But predominantly, there's a number of factors for this, but predominantly genre material, let's talk science fiction, fantasy, and horror, was, let's face it, flights of fancy are inherently not very pragmatic. Writing science fiction stories when it comes to day-to-day life is not necessarily, unless you're Stephen King or you're making a lot of money from what you're writing, whether you're writing science fiction, fantasy, or horror stories, is not very pragmatic. And women, even to this day, in my experience, I have found to be more pragmatic than men. And I think a lot of their pragmatism stems from the fact, these old role models that we all had, women need to know, okay, well, where's the food coming from tonight? That's great that you're a dreamer, but we need to eat. Our baby has to eat. So what are you going to do to provide for those things? And this is something, again, that comes from tens of thousands of years of biology. So I think for the longest time in human history, women didn't know that they too could be dreamers, because the roles that society gave to us, that evolution demanded of us, were one way. Well, over the last 100 years, we have seen a lot of inroads. Our society has been changing. Minority people and whatever, and there's minorities in every society around the world. Wherever you are, there's a different dominant form of people. Like, we're predominantly a white country. That's changing. But if you go to South Korea, it's predominantly South Korean. So there are different minorities depending on where you go. But as more and more people get a voice, and as more and more people, as women realized, oh, perhaps if I don't have children, or I don't have to just be barefoot and cooking in the kitchen, and I can actually have my own life, I can have my own career, I can do other things. I don't have to adhere to these societal norms that we've been having for hundreds of thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. I can live my own life. And I like science fiction, so maybe I'll write some. I mean, even like James Tiptree Jr. was a pen name for a female science fiction writer. There has not been a lot of them up until recently. There's been some, but for the most part, there hasn't been a lot. And the same is true of Hollywood. Traditionally, there just weren't a lot of men, and there weren't a lot of people of color. I mean, there weren't a lot of women and a lot of people of color that were making it in Hollywood, that were being able to direct. Well, like everything else, society's evolving, and it's changing. And it's only a good thing. I'll tell you why. Why? Because people's experiences, like if you grow up black in America, your experience is going to be something that's different from me. Now, if you're going to direct an action film, or you're going to direct a superhero movie, you have that different experience to imbue into your work. And that's great. So we're going to get something new and creative that didn't exist before, because people have a voice and they're able to put their experiences into those things. And for us as viewers, what it's going to mean is that we're only going to get more interesting stories, whether they're science fiction, fantasy, and horror, whether they're on TV or in the movie theaters or whatever. Having people having more diverse people working is only ever going to be a good thing. However, you still have to be talented, and I think there's a little bit, I've seen a little bit of a problem where they want to go after diverse hires, and people have been bitten, because it's great that that people are getting opportunities, but the fact is you also still need to be talented. There's too much money involved. There's too much risk involved, that nowadays, look, if you're comparable, somebody's probably going to take the person of color or a woman or whatever, as opposed to a white man. But if your experience level, if there's a disparity there, and somebody's hired, it's gonna come and bite people in the ass, because at the end of the day, you still need to be talented. Now we're having a lot more inroads, and which I think is great. But for a while, we're going to have to deal with the evolution of the business, and we're going to see a lot more diversity in terms of people who are hired. But at the end of the day, talent still wins out. And remember, anybody can go make an independent movie. The reason people are hired, and I really believe this, I honestly believe this, if you've made a great film, if you make a Fruitville Station, and you get indie cred like Ryan Coogler did, and then you have a good idea and you have a film that shows you're very talented, you can approach a guy like Sylvester Stallone with an idea to make a movie like Creed, and eventually he's ultimately not going to care whether you're black or white, whether you're a woman or not, whether you're even non-binary. I don't care. If you've made a great film and you have good ideas, you'll get hired again. You'll get to make something, because people want good product. They want good product. The thing is, there just weren't a lot of those diverse people working in the Hollywood system. There's going to be more and more and more every day, because as more and more people come into the system, more women directors, more black directors, more minority directors of any kind, they set a precedent for other people that are the same or like-minded or similar from those groups to know that they too can go to Hollywood and make movies, which is great. So, hey, like everything, there's going to be more competition. It's going to get harder. But talent always wins out, ultimately. It really does. We might have an evolutionary period of time that we're going to have to go through, but at the end of the day, all we're going to do is get more voices, different voices, not necessarily better voices, but more diverse voices, which means we're going to get better and more diverse movies. And I do think we're going to get better movies, because in the long run, we're going to get movies that are more unique. The only thing is, remember, what we love, what imagination connoisseurs love, are flights of fancy. And it takes a certain kind of person. It doesn't matter what color they are, what gender they are. A certain kind of person is drawn toward these things, and so I think that we share more. We have more in common than not, and I think that's important. So, Mike Bodden sent in a letter, and Mike said, by the way, I know you said Schnepp loved Commandy, and so do I. That entire world would make a great standalone miniseries on HBO or Netflix. I'm also all in on a Mr. Miracle Big Barda rom-com adventure. Laugh out loud. Well, I was talking about right next to me here. Let's see. I don't know if you can... Here, I'll show it to you. So, yesterday I pulled out my Jack Kirby omnibuses. You have, of course, the Fourth World here, and then the Commandy omnibus here. I love Commandy. I've always loved Commandy. John Schnepp loved Commandy, and yeah, I would imagine that we might see a Commandy series. I could definitely see that happening. A couple people sent in some super chats. Let me get to these here. Sam O'Neill sent in a super chat and said, ended up ordering the whole Star Trek series on Blu-ray and the whole Lord of the Rings extended edition on Blu-ray. I'm in it for the long haul. Well, if you did get the Star Wars Blu-rays, the Star Trek Next Generation Blu-rays, you're gonna enjoy watching them. They look incredible, they sound incredible, and you can watch all of our special features. So very excited to hear what you think, Sam. Stub McShave sends in a tip and says, your comments on screenwriting applies to prose as well. You need to be concrete with details, not bland and abstract. There was a creaking noise from the door as a whimpering, wet, three-legged poodle limped in is more interesting than a dog walked in. Absolutely, Stubble. And yeah, you need to paint your images with ideas. You need to come up with, the more description you have, the better off you are. And yes, your prose still has to be crackling good, a rat-a-tat prose style. But yes, it's the details that get people to come back and read your stuff. I think it's always very important. Zachary Shaw sends in a super chat and says, have you seen Ultra Q? Yes, Ultra Q from the Ultraman universe. Ultra Q is cool. It's a Japanese science fiction show. It's a hoot. I love that series. I haven't bought it. They've been putting out all of the different shows on Blu-ray. They've been putting them out, and they're great box sets. I need to get them all. I love that stuff. I'm a huge fan of Japanese science fiction, so yes, I am I'm a big fan. Bob Call sends in a tip and says, I just missed your Conrad. Someday you'll have to discuss the unique 70s sleuths. Cannon, Banachek, Ironside, Columbo, Barnaby Jones, Shaft. Yes, Shaft was on TV for 2 seasons. Obese, blind, handicapped, slouch, old, and black. Talk about diversity. Yeah, I know, man. You know, what about McMillan and Wife and McLeod? Yeah, no, those are the days, man. And Jim Rockford, man. Oh, did you say Rockford? No, you got a 70s sleuths. He's one. Kolchak the Night Stalker as well, if you want to go the horror route. I mean, that's another good one. Big fan. My man Roberto Suarez sends in a letter. All right, Roberto. So Roberto writes in and says, Dear Rob, I wanted to share a story of a recent interaction with a fellow member of the Post-Geek Singularity. It was initiated by replies to a tweet you had recently posted of a political nature. At first, our exchange was confrontational. It was evident that we stood at opposite ends of the political spectrum, so our initial interaction was defensive. At one point, I disengaged from the exchange, frustrated and feeling like the argument was pointless. But after reflecting on the situation for a few days, and in the midst of all the uncertainty we are now experiencing, I re-engaged with this fellow Post-Geek Singularity member, and conveyed that even though our political differences are vast, I appreciated being able to dialogue with him in a civil way. And that ultimately, at a time when social isolation has become a civic duty, remaining engaged with others, even when we have disagreements, is more important than shutting ourselves down. The conversation that ensued from this point forward turned a corner. They too appreciated the engagement and agreed with me that maintaining discourse was essential. We recognized our differences, yet also came to realize that we shared areas of agreement. Thank you, Rob, for encouraging ongoing discourse and engagement through the Burnettwork, Robservations, and the Post-Geek Singularity. By building this community, you have set an example for me, motivating me to work past the discomfort of having my perspective challenged by others, breaking past my defensiveness, and choosing to stay engaged, respectfully engaged. What you've created here is very special. I am deeply grateful for what you've built. Stay safe and healthy. Roberto. Well, what a nice thing to say. I really enjoy what you had to say there, and here's the thing. I love people, and I've loved all kinds of people growing up, and I've dealt with all kinds of different people in my life. I worked from a very young age in retail. I worked in video stores when there weren't any video stores. There was certainly no Blockbusters around, and they were very sort of high-end, mysterious places. I was lucky to live there. I thought it was fantastic to meet people, and I love talking to all kinds of people. And people would come in the stores, and I would talk to them. And I also came from a family. I never once heard neither my mother or father ever had an unkind word to say about anybody, any minority group, any ethnicity. They never said a bad word about anyone. Now, they would complain if somebody acted stupidly or did something dumb, but it was never personal. It was never about the person. It was more about the act. And my dad, I used to watch my dad when we'd be at parties or something, and my dad was, everyone liked my dad. He had kind of this, he would kind of just saunter around with his cigar, and he loved people too. And my dad read a lot. And while we didn't talk much about other people, like we didn't have these long conversations about life, my dad was he was a very kind man, and I think he just liked people as well. And I don't know if I got it from him, or maybe I got it from just what I liked. I mean, I don't think you can. If you like science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and you like imagination, I find it hard to believe that you're not at least open to other people. Like, I've always thought, this is sort of funny, like, one of the things that I've always loved animals, and animals have I guess they know I like them, animals and kids, but animals to me are the closest things to alien life. So even as I was a kid, I always liked animals. I liked trying to converse with them and talk to them and be around them. And I love other life forms, you know. And I find people to be delightful. And even when you're on opposite sides of an idea, especially if people who are here, if people who come to the Post-Geek Singularity and they go to the Facebook page, by the way, it's a great Facebook page if you haven't gone to the Post-Geek Singularity Facebook page, and if you haven't hung out there or you haven't watched these shows and hang out in the live chats, I think that everybody here is pretty like-minded in that sense. And look, like people like Mark Chure, when he first came here, he announces, I am a toxic fan. You know, he flat out said it. But yet, we might be on different sides of the political spectrum, but we're all still imagination connoisseurs. And so I think that anybody that you meet here, you can probably talk to. And I think that what we really want is, I think there needs to be you have to have an intellectual curiosity about the world, and in order to do that, people that have an intellectual curiosity about the world want to hear all sides of a story, because you have to. You know, it helps you. It helps you figure out what you believe yourself. Like, I don't have a problem having my beliefs tested. And when people call me out on something, I listen. I'm like, that's interesting. Because if they present something to me that I disagree with, I try and be thoughtful and come back out and go, huh. And I've learned a great deal from people. That's how you learn. I once read that you should never think that you know something for sure. Because if you think you absolutely know something, if somebody offers an alternative point of view, then you're not necessarily open to it because you think you know it. But if you think you know most things, or you think you know a lot about something, but not everything about something, you're more open to hearing other points of view. And it's always been interesting to me. I mean, I've told this story before, but I was raised Jewish. But when I was working at Warner Brothers, I became friends with one of my executive production managers. Her name was Penelope Foster, who worked at Warner Brothers. She's one of the coolest ladies that I've ever met in my life. And she was significantly older than me, but I had a massive, massive crush on her. She was beautiful and sexy, but I wouldn't say that to her because she was a very... She knew, but she was a very religious woman as well. And I started going to a church in Van Nuys called the Church on the Way. And I liked going to church with her, and not just because it was her and I had a crush on her, but I liked going to church with her because I liked listening to the pastor there. I liked Jack Hayford, Pastor Jack Hayford, who would deliver these really interesting sermons that were very topical. And he related what was going on. I mean, I know this is what happens in church, but he would back to scripture. But it wasn't fire and brimstone, but he was appealing to, I think, the intellect in all of us. And I really liked it. I liked going there, and it wasn't, obviously it wasn't my belief. I was not raised in the church. I was raised in our synagogue. But I liked going to the Church on the Way, and I felt I really learned a lot. And I was always fascinated by going. And I felt I got something out of it. And I felt that I really understood, like when I went into this church, there was an energy, the same kind of energy I get when I see a great movie, when you're with an audience. But when in that church, when we would go, there was a power in it. And there was a comfort. I could feel it. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And it was a thoughtful environment. And I think that the Pastor Jack, even though it was charismatic sometimes, it was something that I felt was valuable. And I always think it's valuable, but I felt that way when I went to my friend Jeff Swafford's first communion. Raised a Catholic, went to St. Monica's, went to Catholic school. And I liked going to church and seeing all this stuff. And I guess that's kind of how I've always been, and I'm glad to hear, Roberto, that this is going on. I mean, a lot of people have said this to me and said that the Post-Geek Singularity is this community that I've been building is open-minded. I hope I sort of would set that tone. I know I go off on Star Trek Discovery and go off on Star Trek Picard, but in a way, as much as I go off on it, I just want it to be, I do want it to be better. I don't want to hate it. I want the second season of Picard to be great. Maybe the final, the two-parter will wrap things up in a way that I can be like, okay, well, I'll give it to them. They brought it around. Who knows? But the idea that we're creating an environment, my point and what I want to have happen here is that everybody's welcome and everybody will find something of value here, whether it's ideas or whether it's people. And that's what this is all about. A lot of people, it's very funny when people come at me about my views on Star Trek and say, you're spewing hate on your YouTube show to generate clicks. Like, why would I do that? I mean, what's the point of I don't want to spew hate. This whole channel is about stuff I think is cool. I love Star Trek just because a couple of iterations of Star Trek I find to be, well, to put it mildly, not as good as it should be. Doesn't mean I hate Star Trek. So, but I'm glad you had that experience. I'm also glad that the person that you were talking to was able to have that experience. That's that both of you did. What a great thing. I love that. This letter comes from Jeffrey Mao, and it's actually dated today, March 16th, 2020. Greetings, Darth Gibulus. Those who might not know what that means, being Ghibli is a nonsensical word we use over on the John Campea show, and I like being Ghibli. I am pretty sure that I have mentioned to you before about the canonized chronology of Star Trek during the Next Generation years, but it was not in detail. And I thought since we're all talking about Star Trek, I'd talk about it, but from a different angle. So I haven't been a Star Trek fan as long as you have, but we have both been fans of it for a long time before the new canon chronology was established. Up until that point, it was anyone's guess as to what year Star Trek, the original series, takes place in. Obviously, they were coy in the early years with it, never wanting to pin down an exact date, hence the use of the Stardate system. Well, we knew it was the 23rd century, so it was within 100 years of that. It wasn't until the Next Generation was in, I believe, its 5th or 6th season that folks there, under the helm of the Akutas, decided that they would canonize a lot of stuff about Star Trek, such as dates, when important events and the series and shows take place. I tend to, in my mind, call this Okuda canon, but I do not know if they came up with these decisions alone or were part of a larger group. The most important, interesting, and I guess controversial canonizations that occurred were: what was the year in which the first season of Star Trek takes place? When was the Enterprise first commissioned? When did Star Trek the Motion Picture take place? And how many years passed before the motion picture to Star Trek II? And then how much time passed between 4, 5, and 6? To start from earliest to latest, we have the Enterprise being commissioned in 2245. Now, I guess this is relatively mild as a controversy, but it does establish that the starship was over 20 years old when Kirk became captain, and that it had 2 previous captains in Robert April and Christopher Pike, which, if you include the animated series, was canonical, because we learned in the counterclock incident that Robert April was the first captain of the Enterprise, and of course in the Menagerie that Captain Pike was, and Spock served under him for 11 years. We knew about Pike, and April was known but was previously non-canonical. Well, he was canonical. I consider the animated series canonical. Next, the year in which the official pilot for Star Trek, Where No Man Has Gone Before, takes place in 2265, likely in that year. The next regular episode then takes place now almost 2 years later in presumably late 2266. It was curious, but not in any way offensive, that they chose to have the Star Trek seasons take place exactly 300 years after the year when the season ended. So season 1 takes place mostly in 2267, season 2 in 2268, etc. Without any outside evidence pointing one way or the other, the choice to set it on these dates was completely arbitrary. The rationale for setting Where No Man Has Gone Before in 2265 was that it takes place very early in Kirk's 5-year command. Then, nearly 2 years passed to account for changes in crew and uniform. So now, the 3 seasons of Star Trek occupy the last 3 years of the 5-year mission. This is quite opposite from what had been previously assumed by both fans and also novelists, who'd assumed that the end of the series was merely the end of the 3rd year, and they had 2 more to go. This gave them plenty of time to tell extra stories of missions in the final 2 years. Instead, now we have the end of the series coinciding with the 5-year missions nearly ending. This then leads into what I feel is the most awkward and ill-fitting result of this new canonization. The events of Star Trek the Motion Picture now are said to occur in 2271, a mere 2 years after the end of the series in 2269. Well, that's also because Kirk says 2.5 years as head of Starfleet operations haven't exactly made me, I wouldn't consider myself untried. As far as I can tell, there's not much canonical evidence to support this placement other than Decker's comment that it had been something like 18 months since Kirk was in the captain's chair, and again, Kirk was head of Starfleet operations for 2.5 years. And it had been something like 18 months since Kirk was in a captain's chair. The only 2 years passes while 10 years pass in real time makes this very questionable. They don't. It has to be at least 2.5 years and probably more than 5. The aging of the actors doesn't help either, with DeForest Kelley and James Doohan appearing noticeably older, probably due to the fact that they were already older than Shatner and Nimoy by at least 10 years. On a side note, another choice was made to match the ages of most of the human characters to the actors' ages, while Spock is older than Nimoy because it was already established that he had served on the Enterprise for over 10 years prior to Kirk. I think a lot of people thought that Kirk and the Enterprise crew then went on another 5-year mission because there should have been more than enough time passing, and that Decker's reference was to Kirk ending his second 5-year mission and then accepting promotion to Admiral. Or usually that he went on a 5-year mission after Star Trek the Motion Picture. I just find this change to be the one that I agree with the least. I don't feel that there's any benefit to going with only 2 years between the original series and the motion picture. I've never thought of it that way. I've always thought of it at least 5 years. It makes a lot of things not make sense. I could give credit to Star Trek Continues for trying to show how the transition could have occurred, but I don't buy it. Kirk is only 37 in 2270, and I really don't think that he would even want to accept a promotion at Admiral at that age. Sure, I guess he could be, I guess he could have as he was qualified, but I feel like he would want to keep on being a captain. Nonetheless, the change was made. After that, the events of Star Trek II take place in 2285. Again, a strange choice given that while 3 years pass in real time, a full 13 years pass in universe. Within these years, Kirk and crew supposedly have a lengthy mission or two on the Enterprise. I suppose the choice to go with the long time gap was to get Kirk old enough so that he would actually have a reason to feel old in Star Trek II. Well, Star Trek II, it's 15 years. Star Trek II takes place, we know it takes place 15 years after Space Seed, which means that from the season one of the original series, 15 years go by, assuming, you're saying it took place in the third season. I always saw the animated episodes as being 3 and 4, but okay. 4 and 5. However, he'd be 51 by then, and if you're 51, the feeling old at that age in the late 23rd century, something's wrong. At this point, I feel like they got it backwards. More of that time should have passed between the end of the series and the motion picture, and there should have been a shorter gap between the motion picture and 2. Perhaps only 5 years to allow for one last run with the old crew, but no more. The events of Star Trek 2 to 4, while taking 4 years in real time, only take a few months, with 3 pretty much starting immediately after 2 ends. I think some of the reasoning behind putting 2 in 2285 was to account for this, which is always a problem when you tell a serial story over a couple of years. You'll get out of sync with real time. The events of Star Trek 4 then take place in 2287, about a year or so into Kirk's next mission, captaining the Enterprise A after accepting demotion. After that, 6 years passed until Star Trek 6. I'm not sure why they went with that choice, but it's relatively innocuous compared to the others. What this does, though, is set Kirk at exactly the age of 60 years old at the time of his presumed death. So those are my thoughts on the changes in the Star Trek chronology and what I liked, not much, and disliked mostly. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this, Lord Giblius. Giblius? Ghibli. Be Giblius. Lord Giblius. I really like this letter. That is a great thank you, Jeffrey. It's good. It's a good letter. Star Trek canon is always something to ponder, but the way I saw it is that yes, I don't accept that 2 years have gone by from where No Man Has Gone Before to the Man Trap. It could have, I guess, but certainly a lot of time goes by because the uniform changes and the changes to the Enterprise bridge are significant, but yeah, I don't know if that much time went by. All I know is that I always saw Star Trek the Motion Picture, and I don't know why I thought this, as taking place 5 years after the end of the original series. And then Star Trek 2 takes place after that. That would be less than 8 years later or something. Because we know that Space Seed is 15 years before Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Because Khan says it. And he's the superior intellect. So, you got to believe in Khan, right? You got to, yeah. It's really interesting. I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing. You and I have contemplated more about the Star Trek timeline in this small discussion than anybody has on on Star Trek Discovery or Picard, because they don't even get their Borg timeline right, as we all know from Star Trek Picard, which is kind of a bummer. Jeremy Tishabasu sends in a super chat and says, Idris Elba now has the coronavirus. Yes, he announced that he did. I think on social media, he did announce that he has the coronavirus. So, yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a short show today, but a good show. I want to remind you that tonight is episode 2 of Whining About Movies, where Elizabeth and I will drink a bottle of wine as we discuss the film With Nail and I. Bruce Robinson's 1986 film debut, starring, of course, if you know him from he was the American Doctor Who. When Fox made the Doctor Who movie, Paul McGann stars with the great Richard E. Grant in a star-making role as Withnail. I mean, I say Withnail because that's how it's spelled, but they say Withnail. I guess it's Nail, but With Nail and I, it is a comedy, and it's a movie that I will explain tonight. Also, that not a lot of Americans, I think, get. But that will be our second film, Whining About the Movies, tonight at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Join us there. So, I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank, of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden. I want to thank Jordy Lyons and Lewis Yu. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. And, of course, I want to thank Greg Smith, my old friend Greg Smith, for being the great moderating staff that they are. Thank you very much to them. And I would like to thank you all for support, writing letters. You can send me letters right down there or right over there to the Burnettwork.net website for I can read them on the air. Just be sure and tell me if you want me to read them on the air. Or if you don't, you can also send me letters. And if you tell me that you don't want me to read them and they're personal and confidential or something, or you want to send me illicit photos, that's fine too. You can also send me videos. I will play videos. Anybody can send me videos saying hello, tell me how you're doing during this crisis, whatever's going on. I'm here for you. And yes, send me videos. I'll play them on the show. People haven't really sent me videos much lately. So, yeah. And again, thank you for generously supporting the chat or the show through chats and super chats and tips. I very much appreciate that. And we're soon to have a Post-Geek Singularity t-shirt and sweatshirts and hoodies and the merch, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. So if you like that, check that out too. But anyway, as you all know, every person you meet, hang on, let me go full frame on this, right? I got to go full frame as I take you out of here. Every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to all of you, an end to Robservations episode number 363 with some cool breaking news. I say to all of you, stay safe, and as always, have a better day, and stay socially distanced. See you tomorrow. Or no, see you tonight. See you tonight.